All right. Hello and welcome. So very quickly today, I'm going to walk you through how to diagnose a traffic drop. Specifically, we're going to look at how to identify the characteristics of organic search traffic drops. So you can see here, I am inside of Google Analytics. One of the very first steps that I'm going to take here is I'm going to go into Audience. I'm going to click Overview. So you can see here, I've selected a date range where I have created a traffic drop here. So I can see here that I've got a traffic drop. This is between October and December. And I can see right here, right around November 21st, traffic seems to really fall off a cliff here and keep going. And so one of the things that we'll kind of see commonly as a webmaster or a publisher is look at something like this and say, oh, geez, this must be Google hitting me with some type of algorithm update. And so one of the very first things we want to do is actually confirm basically what's going on. So it's important that we ask basically those 4 or 5 basic questions of when, who, what, where, and why. And so a lot of times we jump to the why. So why did traffic on November 21st on a Monday all of a sudden just fall off a cliff the next day? And basically traffic went from 8,000 users a day all the way down to around 2,000. And so before we try to start to speculate why, we know when it was. So now let's take a closer look at who was affected. So what I like to do in these cases is go into segments, and I like to look at traffic through a singular lens. Segments allow me to look at all my traditional Google Analytics reports, but to only look at a certain segment of the traffic. So I can look at direct traffic, just US traffic, mobile and tablet traffic. All these different pre-configured segments are in here, and you can also design your own. So you can also look at custom parameters and things along those lines, but you will also find in here organic traffic is one that is already pre-built in. Okay, so I'm going to apply this. And I'm looking at this over the top of all users. And so you can see here, in this case, my organic traffic being this orange line here, you can see relative to this blue line, it looks fairly steady. So it looks like the major traffic drop that has happened for all the different users, I don't quite see that in this orange line, but it's hard to tell because so much of this traffic appears to not be organic. So let's say now that we are going to remove this segment here. And once I do, I'm only looking at organic traffic now. So now all of a sudden we get a very different picture because now I can go back to my November 21st date, which is right here. And I can actually see that actually organic traffic is very largely unaffected after that date. And in fact, it is actually growing here the past few weeks inside of this timeline. So what this tells me is that I do have a traffic drop, that is for sure. But in this case, it is not an organic traffic drop. So the most important thing for us is to really identify who is affected by any kind of traffic drop. Now let's pretend that I was able to identify organic traffic as the culprit. We're still not done asking who. So essentially, whenever we're asking who, we're looking at our audience. So this is a good place for us to be. Let's keep our segment here of organic traffic. You know, we were looking at November 21st is this date. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over here to November 21st, and I'm going to look at it for just about 2 or 3 weeks after that date. And I'm actually going to compare that to the previous period. So I'm going to look at the exact same number of days, just the period prior to the time period that I'm looking at. And what this will do is this will actually give me an idea of how large the event was. So if I looked at November 21st as a potential date where I saw a decline or a steep drop off, which are both very different things, this will tell me basically how great was it? Did I lose, 35% of my traffic? Did I lose 60%? In some cases, we may be perceiving a large drop, but when you go look at it in reality, 0.95%, or maybe it's just a very small amount. And in those cases, seasonality in a lot of cases can account for it. But let's pretend once again, for the sake of this conversation, that my drop was actually much larger. So I can go back to my November 21st date and say organic traffic is maybe dropped off 55%, not my 0.095%. And so now I need to continue diving even deeper into this. And so now I may want to go over here to behavior. and maybe even check out my frequency of new versus return. Is it new visitors or return visitors that are particularly affected? It doesn't appear so in this case. I can see my percentage change here. This is a good way for you to be able to tell, in some cases, if it's not organic traffic, if you've done something to basically keep away your return visitors, like maybe you're not publishing a newsletter anymore, and that could be the reason why. It's actually an example I've seen before. But another good way to look at it is by location. Is it all across the globe that is affected, or is it only in certain regions? So I can see here, I'm looking at those same date ranges in the United States, India, the United Kingdom, Canada. So I can go on down the list, and I may learn that I'm completely unaffected in everywhere except for perhaps Australia. And so that could maybe give me some insights into what particular area. But if I'm dealing with a wholesale, legit organic traffic drop, a lot of times you will see it across the board. And so then another thing that we want to look at a lot of times is we want to go into devices. And this will tell me basically, is this happening on one particular device more than others? It may be beyond just mobile, tablet, and desktop. I want to look at to see specifically, there may be a certain window type that is preventing my site from being viewed properly by my visitors. And so that may be causing higher bounce rates directly from the SERP, which could have caused a traffic loss. But I can also look directly at my mobile overview here and see basically, do I have a mobile search problem or do I have a global search problem? So you can see here, mobile traffic is up, tablet traffic is down, desktop traffic is slightly down. I'd be looking here to see a major delta between my mobile and desktop traffic. Largely what that could say, especially in this mobile first index world, that there may be a chance that I may have missed something on my mobile site. There may be something left off of it that belongs on my that exists on my desktop site, and that would be something worth going back to revisit. And so those are just a couple ways you can start to dig in and figure out specifically what's going on here. Now, let's figure out exactly what is affected. So we know who is affected. So now what we want to find out is essentially what pages are affected. So is it every single page on my site affected by an organic traffic drop? That usually doesn't make much sense unless there is some kind of systemic site-wide issue. Generally, if you see rankings drop, it will be on a page-by-page basis. If you start seeing lots of pages at once drop, it usually is something site-wide that potentially has happened, or again, a Google algorithm update could potentially account for that. But I can go in here and I can look at pages, and I can see each individual pages, starting with the most popular, how has their traffic been affected one period versus the next. But one of the things that might be even more useful looking at is landing pages, because this is directly where people are coming from search. And so a lot of times what you'll find here is if you have de-indexing problems where maybe a particular page has been de-indexed, you'll see a massive 100% drop here. Anytime you see 100 here when comparing previous periods, especially after a steep drop, that generally means a page has been de-indexed by Google. And one of the best ways to deal with that is then to go into Search Console, have the page recrawled, look for indexing and crawl errors and things along those lines. And this is really one of the best ways to identify exactly what has been affected, to look at every page and then look at your landing pages specifically. And that'll give you a really good idea. And so now once you are equipped with some of this information, you can start to ask the question of why. And why could be a lot of different things. But like I mentioned before, it really comes down to who and what is affected. If it's organic traffic and it is all of your pages generally, then it is usually something systemic or site-wide. It could also be a change that Google has made. If it's on particular pages, then it's worth digging into those specific pages to understand exactly maybe what has happened on those pages. You can start looking at the bounce rate trends, the time on site trends on those pages to see maybe has user behavior shifted on those as well. If you're an Zoic user, it's worth getting into big data analytics and looking at engagement metrics to get a much better idea of basically how these things are being affected. You can look at scroll percentages and a lot of other information that can be really helpful, like engagement time. But I can see here, look, I'm looking at one particular page over a period of time. I can see in this case, I'm in great shape. My bounce rate is down. My pages per session is up. Session duration is up. I'd be looking for the opposite if I was trying to identify maybe some user behavior shifts on this page. So that about wraps it up. Hopefully this has helped you to identify some potential culprits for organic traffic drops and also help you kind of diagnose specific traffic drop issues.